She adjusted his tie. One precise, unhurried movement, a fraction to the left, her fingers certain and calm, like she had every right in the world to be standing exactly where she was standing, doing exactly what she was doing. Like there weren't four armed men with their hands hovering near their jackets. Like the most feared man in Seoul wasn't looking down at her with an expression nobody in that building had ever seen on his face before. She straightened the tie one final time, looked up at him. Her voice was barely above a whisper, quiet enough that only he could hear it. Your driver has a gun that isn't his service weapon. He's been reaching for it since he walked in. Don't get in the car. She held his gaze for one full second. You look good, by the way. 3 minutes earlier, Khloe Walters had been nobody. Just a woman sitting alone at a lobby cafe table in the Regency Pinnacle Hotel, Mapo district. Laptop open, coffee gone cold, watching Seoul move through the glass walls of one of its most expensive hotels. 11 days in this city. One failed job interview that morning. Enough money in her account for 2 more weeks before the situation became something she couldn't talk herself out of. She had been people watching the way only someone with nowhere urgent to be can. Absorbing everything. Cataloging faces. Reading the room out of pure habit, the way her mother had always told her was going to get her into trouble one day. Her mother had not been wrong. She noticed the driver the moment he came through the side entrance. Not because he looked dangerous. He didn't. Not obviously. He looked like every other suited professional moving through that lobby, but his right hand kept drifting to his left side every 30 seconds, hovering near his jacket, then returning to his hip. Over and over, like a tell he couldn't stop performing. And when the man in the charcoal suit entered through the main doors, the one the entire lobby seemed to unconsciously reorganize itself around, she watched the driver's jaw tighten in a way that had nothing to do with professionalism and everything to do with someone managing something enormous happening inside them. She closed her laptop. She stood up. And before any rational thought could talk her out of it, she was already moving. Now, she was here, standing in the wreckage of what had been a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, with 4 armed men staring at her and the most unreadable pair of eyes she had ever encountered looking down at her from a face that was objectively, inconveniently, devastating. She dropped her hands, stepped back, turned around, walked back to her table, sat down, picked up her cold coffee, and stared into it like it might tell her what on earth she had just done. 3 seconds of absolute silence held the lobby. Then his voice, low, unhurried, built for obedience. Stop, she stopped. If you are new here, subscribe right now because what is about to happen in this story is the kind of thing that will keep you up at night. Hit the like button, drop a comment telling me what you think Khloe just walked into, and let's get back to Seoul. What happened next took 45 seconds. Kang Ji-ho, though she still didn't know his name, gave his head of security, Park Tae-won, a single nod. The kind of nod that contained an entire instruction. Tae-won moved to the driver with 2 men. The search was quiet, professional, and final. A silenced pistol, concealed beneath the jacket, loaded, safety off. The driver's legs gave out before anyone touched him. He was already talking, fast, fractured, desperate. My daughter! They have my daughter! I had no choice! Please! I didn't want any of this! Please! Ji-ho stood with his hands clasped behind his back and listened to every single word. His eyes the entire time were across the lobby. On Khloe, who was not watching any of it. Who was staring into her coffee with the focused attention of someone trying very hard to be anywhere else. He let the silence after the driver's last syllable stretch for a moment that felt deliberate. Then he made a decision. Quietly. Finally. The way he made every decision. The driver was escorted through the side exit. The hotel manager appeared, took one look at Taewon's face, and found somewhere else urgently to be. The lobby sealed itself back together like water over a stone. Smooth. Immediate. As if nothing had happened at all. Ji-ho walked back across the marble floor and sat down across from her. The silence between them lasted long enough to mean something. How did you know? His hand, Khloe said, no hesitation, no performance. He kept reaching toward his left side. Someone carrying legally doesn't do that. The weight is already settled in their mind. The decision is already made. He was still deciding. That's always the most dangerous kind of person in a room. Ji-ho studied her the way he studied everything. Completely. Without rushing. Who are you? Khloe Walters. My job interview fell through this morning. I've been sitting in this lobby for 2 hours. That's not what I asked. It's the whole answer. He reached into his jacket, placed a card on the table, an address in Bugak Heights, a phone number, nothing else. Come tomorrow at 9. There's a position. What kind? A useful one. He stood, and then, unhurried, deliberate, holding her gaze, he reached up and adjusted his own tie. Just slightly. You were right. It was crooked. He walked away. Khloe sat alone and looked at the card for a long time. She should have left it on the table. She knew that. Even sitting there with the rain beginning to streak the lobby windows and her return flight to Charlotte still technically an option, she should have walked away, found a different door, built a different life. The problem was the address, Bugak Heights, because for 8 months, at 2 in the morning at her kitchen table with cold takeout and 3 laptops open, one name had lived at the center of every thread she pulled, a name connected to that part of this city, a name attached to a network so carefully built it barely cast a shadow, a network that had reached all the way from Seoul to Charlotte and quietly, surgically destroyed her brother Marcus's life without ever once learning his name. Marcus Walters, 24, had wanted to be a structural engineer since he was 9 years old. She could still see him at that age. Sitting at their mother's kitchen table with graph paper and a broken ruler, drawing bridges that leaned slightly because he hadn't figured out straight lines yet, explaining to their mother with complete seriousness why this particular imaginary structure needed a suspension design. Their mother had listened to every word like it was the most important engineering briefing she had ever received. Khloe had sat across from them both and thought, with the quiet certainty of an older sister, that Marcus was going to be something extraordinary. He got the scholarship. He worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. He filled 3 notebooks with structures he was going to build one day, and sent Khloe voice notes at 2 in the morning about load-bearing calculations and tension structures and bridges he was going to design. And she had listened to every single one of them, lying in the dark of her apartment, smiling at the ceiling. And then, Lim Dae-sung's operation found him. Not directly. It never worked directly. It worked through layers, through people who knew people, through the slow patient encirclement that looked exactly like opportunity until the walls were already up. A connection that seemed legitimate, a job that seemed like a break. And then before Marcus understood what was happening, his name was attached to things it should never have been near, and the evidence had been constructed so carefully that even people who loved him had moments of terrible doubt. The scholarship was gone. The record was marked. The notebooks were in a box in their mother's closet because Marcus couldn't look at them anymore. Khloe had sat with that for exactly 1 week. Then she had opened her laptop and started pulling threads. 8 months later, one name sat at the top of everything, Lim Dae-sung, and the address on the card in her hand connected directly to the part of Seoul where that name operated. She hadn't come here with a plan, but she had come with a reason. Khloe picked up the card, put it in her pocket, closed her laptop. Outside, Seoul moved in the rain. Enormous and indifferent, holding all of its secrets simultaneously. She had no idea, sitting in that lobby, that she had just saved the life of the one man in this city with both the power and the proximity to give Marcus Walters his future back. She would find that out soon enough. The estate in Bugak Heights swallowed her whole. That was the only way to describe it. She had taken a car the following morning, told herself she was composed and prepared, and then the gates had opened and the driveway had unrolled ahead of her, and the house had revealed itself. Stone, and glass, and silence, set back from the road behind walls that were decorative in the way that a polite warning is decorative. And every composed, prepared thing inside her quietly revised itself. She was met at the entrance by Park Tae-won, who looked at her the way a mathematician looks at an equation that hasn't resolved yet. He showed her through the entrance hall and explained the position in a voice that contained exactly 0 unnecessary words. Household management, oversight of domestic staff, legitimate, well-paid, and watched, though he didn't say that last part because he didn't need to. She understood immediately that the job was real. She understood just as immediately that the scrutiny was realer. She was given a room in the East Wing, shown the parts of the house that were hers to move through freely. The staff moved around her carefully, eyes down, voices low, with the particular economy of people who had learned that in this house, unnecessary things had a cost. She told herself she was here for Marcus, that this was the only reason she had picked up the card, that the man who had sat across from her in the hotel lobby and looked at her like she was a problem he intended to solve was simply a proximity to Lim Dae-sung, a door she needed to stay inside long enough to find what she was looking for. She told herself this with great conviction for approximately 4 days. Then things became considerably more complicated. On her 3rd evening in the estate, she was looking for a briefing folder she had been asked to file when she took a wrong turn down a corridor she hadn't been shown. She heard it before she found it. The absence of sound. Silence of a specific quality coming from behind a door that was open by a fraction. She should have kept walking. She stopped. Through the fractional gap in the door, she could see him. Ji-ho, alone. No guards, no Taiwan, no briefings on the desk. He was standing at the window with his back to the room and he was utterly, completely still. Not the controlled stillness she had seen in the lobby. Not the armored composure he wore like a second suit everywhere she had seen him since. This was different. This was a man in private. And in private, Kang Ji-ho looked like someone carrying something very heavy that he had been carrying alone for a very long time. He didn't move, didn't check his phone, didn't review a document, just stood at the window with the weight of his own world visible in the set of his shoulders, in a way that it never was when anyone was watching. Khloe stood in the corridor for exactly 5 seconds. Then she made herself walk away, quietly, quickly, before he turned around. Before she had to account for what she had just felt standing in that hallway, watching a powerful man be briefly, privately human. She filed the folder, went back to her room, sat on the window seat. She told herself it meant nothing. She was a spectacularly unconvincing liar. The slow burn started small, the way all the most significant things do. On the 5th morning, she made his coffee herself. Left it outside his office door. No knock, no note, just the coffee. Exactly right. Black. Stronger than the kitchen staff made it by default. She was already at the other end of the corridor before his door opened. That evening, when she returned to her room, there was a plate of food outside her door. The dish she had mentioned once in passing to one of the kitchen assistants that she missed from home. Someone had heard. Someone had remembered it and made a decision about it. No note. Khloe stood in the corridor holding the plate and looked at the empty hallway. Of course, she said softly to nobody. She smiled at the ceiling that night. She was fairly certain, no proof, just the particular certainty of someone who had been paying close attention, that somewhere on the other side of the estate, behind a closed door, so did he. It continued. Neither of them acknowledged it directly. That was the unspoken agreement. This thing existed only in the space between actions, never in words, never named. It was safer that way. It was also, Khloe was discovering with some alarm, more consuming than anything direct would have been. One afternoon in the 2nd floor library, she was alone practicing Korean out loud, working through a passage that was defeating her. The same phrase over and over, her accent reshaping it, correcting, trying again. She was so focused she didn't hear him in the doorway until his voice came from across the room. Quiet. Precise. Saying the phrase once. Correctly. the way it was supposed to sound. She turned. He was already leaving. The word hanging in the air and the ghost of him in the doorway and her heart doing something she had not given it permission to do. She sat with the echo of his voice saying that one word for an unreasonable amount of time. Then there was the meeting, a routine briefing, household logistics, where they both reached for the same document at the same time. His hand, her hand, fingers almost touching over a sheet of paper that suddenly contained the entire atmosphere of the room. Both went completely still for 1 second. Neither looked up. Neither acknowledged it. The meeting continued. Neither of them heard another word that was said. Taiwan, sitting across the table, looked at his pen, said nothing. He was a professional. And then the rain. She had been crossing the rear courtyard on a routine errand when the sky opened without warning the way Seoul skies do in autumn. Sudden and complete and absolutely committed. By the time she made it back inside, she was soaked through, locks dripping, wringing out her sleeve in the corridor and laughing at herself because there was genuinely nothing else useful to do about it. She heard footsteps rounding the corner. She looked up. Jiho stopped. He looked at her. Soaking wet, shoulders shaking with quiet laughter, completely unbothered by the state of herself. And something happened to his face that it had absolutely no business doing in a corridor of his own house. Something open and unguarded that he caught approximately 1 second after it arrived and closed off immediately. He disappeared without a word. 2 minutes later, as a staff member appeared with a towel, dry clothes in her exact size, and a cup of ginger tea, the specific kind she had mentioned once in a conversation she hadn't even been certain he was in earshot of. From the household stores, the staff member said, already retreating. Khloe stood in the corridor holding the tea, holding the dry clothes, looking at the empty hallway. Of course, she said. Same 2 words, same soft tone. She changed, wrapped both hands around the tea, sat on her window seat and looked at the rain, and thought about a man who could silence a room with 1 word, and apparently could not say a single direct thing to her if his empire depended on it. Now let me ask you something. A man like Jiho, who controls an entire empire, who has not trusted a single person in 15 years, is leaving food outside a woman's door and remembering exactly how she takes her tea. Is that love or is that control dressed up pretty? Drop your answer in the comments because the women and the men are going to disagree on this one. Keep watching. What she didn't know was that at the other end of the estate, behind the closed door of his private study, Kang Jiho was sitting at his desk doing absolutely no work. He had opened a briefing document, read the first line, closed it. He was thinking about a woman who adjusted strangers' ties in hotel lobbies and laughed in the rain like it was a gift rather than an inconvenience, and looked at him consistently, persistently, like he was just a man. He was not accustomed to being looked at like that. He was not accustomed to wanting anything he hadn't chosen to want. And yet, here it was, and arriving daily, in small and specific and completely ungovernable forms. He was, though he would not have used this word, entirely undone. He was also running out of time, because while Khloe was learning the architecture of his world, and Jiho was learning what it felt like to need something he didn't know how to ask for, something else entirely was moving through the shadows of the estate. Patient. Methodical. 3 years in the building. Its name was Lim Dae-sung, and it was almost ready. She found out on a Wednesday evening in a corridor she wasn't supposed to be in after hours. She had gone to return a book to the second-floor library. Late, later than usual. The corridor passed a wing that was technically off-limits to staff after 9, but had never been given a reason. And Khloe Walters was constitutionally incapable of respecting a rule without a reason. She heard the voices before she reached the library. 2 of them. Low, fast, in Korean that was clearly intended to be private. She slowed, stood completely still in the dark. Lim Dae-sung's name, a date 2 weeks away, and a phrase she caught only partially but understood with cold and immediate clarity. After the director is gone. A door shifted, the voices stopped, footsteps retreating fast. Khloe stood alone in the dark corridor for a long time. Her heart was slamming against her ribs, but her face was completely still, the two things existing in her simultaneously, the way they always had, the storm inside and the calm outside. The thing that had kept her alive through 8 months of pulling threads on a criminal network that killed people for inconveniencing it. This was the moment she had come to Seoul for. She had confirmation. She could take this, walk out tonight, find a way to use it, go home, finish what she had started at her kitchen table for Marcus. She stood there calculating it. The angles, the exits, the fastest route to the information reaching someone who could act on it. But Ji-ho was in this house, and whatever Lim Dae-sung was planning ended with him dead. She thought about coffee left outside a door with no note. A word said correctly from a doorway. A man standing alone at a window, carrying something heavy that nobody else was allowed to see. Dry clothes in her exact size. The way he had looked at her from across a room when he thought nobody was watching, with an expression that had no strategy in it at all. She made her decision, and it was not the sensible one. She requested a private meeting the following morning. Taewon received the request with measured neutrality and took it to Ji-ho. Ji-ho agreed immediately, which told Taewon several things he filed carefully and did not comment on. She sat across from Ji-ho in the corner office and told him everything. The voices, the date, the phrase. Lim Dae-sung's name spoken inside his own estate by people on his payroll. The driver in the lobby wasn't the plan, she said. It was the opening move. He's already inside your house. He's been building this for a long time. Ji-ho was completely still. Something cold and precise moving behind his eyes. Oh, you could have left instead. You had enough to walk out of here tonight and never come back. I could have not said anything in that hotel lobby either. He looked at her. The recognition of a pattern in her. A consistency. Something she did not do for reward or recognition, but because it was simply the shape of who she was. How do you know that name? Lim Dae-sung. You said it like you've said it before. The first crack in her composure. Small, but there, and he saw it immediately because he saw everything. Because I have, but that's a different conversation. Not for long, he said quietly. She believed him, and the weight of what she had just handed him, and what he had just promised her in return, settled between them in the silence, like something neither of them was ready to name yet. What followed moved beneath the surface of the estate like a current under ice. Ji-ho and Taewon conducted a quiet, surgical review of every person inside the network. No visible alarm, no disruption to the surface of normal life. Khloe became unexpectedly essential, not through training or strategy, but through the same quality that had saved Ji-ho's life in a hotel lobby. She noticed people who relaxed at the wrong moment, who avoided certain corridors, who looked at Ji-ho with a fraction too much studied neutrality, the performed kind, the kind that was working hard to hide something underneath it. Ji-ho watched her work from across rooms. She never knew he was watching. This was simply who she was, and he understood, watching her, that it had never been performed for anyone. It was not a skill she deployed. It was the way she moved through the world. Taewon appeared beside him during one of these moments. She's useful, he said quietly. Ji-ho, without looking away from her, said, she's more than that. Taewon filed this alongside everything else he had been filing for weeks and said nothing. He was a professional. But he had been doing this job for 15 years, and he knew what he was looking at, and he knew with the quiet certainty of someone who had watched his boss operate in every conceivable condition that Khloe Walters was the first person in a very long time who had gotten all the way through. Not through strategy, not through beauty, not through calculated proximity, but in spite of every wall Ji-ho had ever built, simply by being exactly who she was consistently and without apology. He thought that was a good thing. He thought it carefully, professionally, and entirely privately. 3 names were identified, quietly removed. Lim Dae-sung felt his timeline disrupting and accelerated, which was when he stopped being subtle. It happened on a Thursday evening in the rear garden during the 40-minute window between guard rotations. 2 men came over the south wall. They had been told exactly where she would be and exactly when. They were not expecting what they found. Khloe heard them before she saw them. She assessed in under 3 seconds. 2 men. Exit route cut off. Garden wall to her right. Stone border along the path. She moved laterally, not away but toward the wall, buying space and angle. 1 man closed fast and grabbed her arm. She dropped her full body weight instantly, twisted into his grip rather than against it. Felt his balance commit forward, used every pound of his own momentum against him. He went down hard on the stone path. She put distance between herself and the second man, made enough noise to bring the entire south wing, and kept the wall at her back until the guards arrived 40 seconds later. When Ji-ho arrived personally, which was not his role, which Taiwan noted without a single word, she was upright against the garden wall, breathing hard, composed, mostly. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face that he shut down quickly. "Are you hurt?" "No." "You took one of them down yourself." He grabbed my arm. A beat of silence that contained more than either of them said. "I don't like that." There and gone, the ghost of something crossing his face in the space between one breath and the next. He held her gaze for one moment that lasted longer than either of them intended, and then he turned to Taiwan, and the moment closed, sealed over, professional again. That night, to Taiwan. "She doesn't go anywhere without 2 guards, non-negotiable." Taiwan looked at his boss with careful eyes, understood everything that was not being said. A pause. "She's going to be all right, you know." Ji-ho looked at him. "I'm just saying," Taiwan said, with the measured tone of a man who never just said anything. "She's going to be all right." He left. Ji-ho stood alone in his office for a long time after that, looking at the city through the window, his hand still, his face giving nothing away to the empty room. This is the part where some of you are going to say he should have told her directly, instead of sending guards. And some of you are going to say the guard said everything. Drop a comment and let's see which side you're on. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because the next part of this story is the one that will break you in half. Lim Dae-sung's next move was quieter and more devastating than anything physical. Planted documents surfaced through a channel that looked legitimate. Financial transfers, a communication thread, Khloe Walters, her Charlotte address, dates that aligned precisely with her arrival in Seoul and every significant moment inside the estate. The paperwork connecting her to Lim Dae-sung's organization was meticulous, completely fabricated, and absolutely terrifyingly convincing. It was the work of someone who had been watching her since the moment she walked into that lobby. Someone who had understood exactly what she was becoming inside this house and had decided to use it as the weapon. Taewon brought it to Ji-ho without comment. Ji-ho looked at the documents for a long time. He thought about the lobby, the tie, the coffee outside his door with no note, the library doorway, the almost touch over the document, the rain in the corridor, the garden wall, the way she had said Lim Dae-sung's name like she had been carrying it for a long time, worn smooth by repetition, the way you carry a name you have said 10,000 times in the dark by yourself with nobody listening. Everything that had felt like trust rearranged itself into something that looked like architecture, a long game, a perfect setup. And he, the most careful man in Seoul, the man who had not trusted a single person in 15 years, had walked directly into it. Something cold settled behind his eyes. His face closed entirely. "Bring her to me." He laid the documents on the table in front of her. She looked at them. Her face changed. Not guilt, not fear, but something worse. The expression of someone watching something true be dressed as a lie and used as a weapon against them. the expression of someone who has been here before and knew, from the moment the papers hit the table, exactly what was happening and exactly how much it was going to cost. "Tell me who sent you." "These are fabricated. Your name, your address, dates that match every week you've been inside this house." Her voice was absolutely steady. "Lim Dae-sung has American connections going back a decade. He knew who I was the moment I walked into that lobby. I was a variable he hadn't planned for, and this is how he removes variables. He builds a file. He makes it airtight. He lets the person holding the most power do his work for him. You of all people should be able to see that." "You said his name like you'd said it before." "I told you that was a different conversation. You've been inside this house for weeks, with access, with information, with proximity to everything and everyone in it." Her voice broke. Not with tears, with fury, clean, controlled and devastating. "Don't react. Think. You built an empire on reading people correctly. You sat across from me in that lobby and looked at me like you saw something real. I am asking you to use that now. Read me." He looked at her for a long, terrible moment. The kind of moment that decides things permanently. Then he called for Taewon. "Take her to the East Wing. Lock it." He walked out. Khloe stood in the center of the room. Did not fight it. Did not beg. She walked to the East Wing. Heard the lock turn. Sat on the windowsill and looked at Seoul blazing below her. Enormous. Indifferent. Magnificent. And allowed herself, for the first time since the lobby, to feel the full weight of what she had walked into. She was furious. Not the hot, reactive kind. The cold, deep kind. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone and doesn't move for hours. She was hurt in a way she had not given herself permission to be until this exact moment. Hurt in the specific way that only arrives when someone you have quietly, privately, completely begun to trust looks at you and chooses not to. Chooses the paper, chooses the easier thing, chooses the story that requires less courage to believe. She sat in the dark. And she waited. Because Khloe Walters had spent 8 months pulling threads on a criminal network in a foreign country, alone, at a kitchen table with no backup and no guarantee, and she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who had made a study of patience, that the truth always surfaced. Always. The only variable was time. Jiho went back to his office and sat down and opened the documents and read them again. Every line, every transfer, every date. He read them the way he read everything, completely without rushing, looking for the seam, the place where the construction showed. He was very good at finding seams. It was the thing that had kept him alive longer than most people in his world. He thought about the lobby, the tie, the coffee, the library, the almost touch, the rain, the garden wall, upright, composed. He grabbed my arm. "I don't like that." The way she had looked at him from the very first moment, like he was just a man, like the empire and the fear in the 15 years of carefully constructed distance, were things she had simply decided not to be impressed by. Not performed indifference. Real indifference. The kind that comes from someone whose attention is pointed somewhere more important. He closed the documents. He got up, walked down the corridor, down the East Wing hallway, past 2 guards who looked straight ahead. He stopped outside the locked door, and he sat down on the floor. Not to confront her, not to question her, not for any reason he could have explained to any person in his world, including himself. He just sat there, and on the floor of his own hallway, outside a locked door, in the dark. The most feared man in Seoul, sitting on the floor because he did not know what else to do with the thing that was happening inside him, and he was not ready to walk away from it. On the other side of the door, Khloe heard him stop. She knew it was him. She had no rational explanation for this, only that the quality of the silence changed when he was nearby, and had been changing for weeks, and she had been pretending not to notice, and she was done pretending. She pressed her back against the door and closed her eyes. Neither of them spoke. The hallway held them both. Seoul glittered beyond the window at the end of the corridor, indifferent and blazing, holding its millions of stories simultaneously without judgment. He sat there for 20 minutes. Then Taewon appeared around the corner. He stopped dead. The most feared man in Seoul was sitting on a hallway floor with his back against a locked door. Taewon, 15 years, everything he had seen, everything he had managed without expression, stopped dead and stood there for 1 full second before he did anything at all. Then he walked forward quietly. He crouched down to his boss's level, something he had never done, a gesture that cost him nothing and meant everything, and held out a folder. The transfers route through a shell company appearing in 3 other confirmed Lim Dae-sung operations, he said quietly. The signature on the communication thread predates her arrival in Seoul by 2 years. The server has fabricated evidence before, 3 times that we can confirm. A pause. I also accessed her personal search history. So 8 months, Marcus Walters, Korean Syndicate, Lim Dae-sung. She wasn't sent here. She came here because she had no other door. He let that sit for a moment. She saved you before she knew your name. She stayed when leaving would have been easier and safer and more sensible in every way. She told you the truth when lying would have protected her. And when she had everything she needed to walk out of this house and use it, she came to you instead. A pause. The part that cost Taewon something. The part he said not as a security chief, but as a man who had been watching for 15 years and was no longer willing to watch in silence. I have seen 100 people try to get close to you for what you have. She is the first person I have ever watched get close to you in spite of it. He straightened, left the folder in his boss's hands. You were wrong, he said. 3 words, twice in 15 years. Jiho read the folder on the floor of the hallway. When he finished, he sat with it for a long moment. Then he stood up, looked at the locked door, and took out the key himself. She didn't turn around when the door opened. She heard it, heard his footsteps, stayed at the window with her arms crossed and her eyes on the city that had been holding her in suspense for weeks. He told her, the documents were fabricated. Taewon had confirmed everything. She had been right. Silence. You looked me in the eye. Her voice was quiet and absolutely immovable. After the lobby, after the driver, after the garden wall, after every single thing that has happened in this house since the day I walked through those gates. You looked me in the eye and you chose the paper over the person. The evidence. I know what the evidence looked like. I spent 8 months building a case on a man nobody could touch using nothing but public records and late nights and my own stubborn refusal to stop. I know exactly what fabricated evidence looks like when it's done well. I am not talking about the evidence. I am talking about what you chose. A pause. Her voice dropped. I came to Seoul for Lim Dae-sung because he destroyed my brother's life and dismantled 8 years of work and ambition, and never once said his name while he did it. I followed the thread until it led here. I found a door and I walked through it. But I warned you in that lobby before I knew your name. I stayed in this house when I had everything I needed to leave. I told you the truth when it would have been so much easier not to. She stopped, looked at him directly. Not because of Marcus, because of you. The last 4 words landed in the room like something that could not be taken back. He didn't try to take them back. He stood with them, with the full weight of what they cost her to say, and he did not look away. I know how to run an empire, he said finally. His voice was different, stripped of the armor all the way down to something she had only ever seen once before, through a fractional gap in a door on a corridor she wasn't supposed to be in. I know how to read a threat, protect what I've built, make decisions that don't leave room for error. I don't know how to... He stopped. The sentence he had been carrying for 15 years and had no ending for. I haven't trusted anyone in 15 years. Not once, not fully. And when I saw those documents, I felt something I didn't have a category for. Something I didn't know what to do with. So I handled it the only way I know how to handle things I don't understand. By locking them away, she said. Yes. The silence between them was enormous and completely honest, and neither of them looked away from it. Marcus, she said finally. Quieter now. The fury still there, but underneath it something more fragile and more real. His name is Marcus. He's 24 years old. He wanted to be a structural engineer. He used to send me voice notes at 2 a.m. about load calculations and tension structures and bridges he was going to build one day. And I would lie in the dark listening to all of it and think that he was going to be something extraordinary. And then Lim Dae-sung reached into his life with both hands and took it apart without ever once saying his name. To him, Marcus was just a number in an operation, just a piece of collateral in something much larger. That is what I cannot forgive. Ji-ho absorbed every word, every syllable of it. Tell me everything, he said quietly. All of it. About Marcus, about Lim Dae-sung, about the 8 months. Every thread you pulled and how you pulled it. Why? Because Marcus matters. A pause. Because you matter. Another pause. Longer. Harder. The most difficult sentence this man had constructed in 15 years, and he did not look away from her while he said it. And I handled this wrong. Oh, let me make it right. Khloe looked at him for a long time. At this man who sat on hallway floors outside locked doors and left plates outside rooms without notes and said one word from library doorways and had spent 15 years being the most untouchable person in every room he entered and was standing here now with every piece of armor removed and making no move to replace it. She sat down and she started to talk. What Ji-ho did with the information she gave him was a thing of cold, precise, unhurried brilliance. He fed a single piece of false intelligence through the one channel he had deliberately left open. A location, a time, the suggestion of vulnerability from a man who was never vulnerable. Lim Dae-sung had been patient for 3 years, but patience has a breaking point, and his had been reached weeks ago. He had felt the operation shifting beneath him, had felt the careful architecture of his takeover beginning to develop cracks, and he had been pressing harder and faster and with less precision because of it. That urgency was the first mistake. The second mistake was believing that Kang Ji-ho would ever, under any circumstances, be exactly where Lim Dae-sung expected him to be. He arrived at a disused logistics facility on Seoul's southern waterfront, expecting chaos and leverage, and the beginning of everything he had been building toward. He found Ji-ho standing in the dark, composed, waiting, Tae-won behind him, a full team positioned in the shadows of the building around them. What happened to Lim Dae-sung's operation that night was not loud or dramatic. It was thorough. Every layer, the network, the planted operatives, the financial structure, the 3-year patient construction of a quiet takeover came apart with the efficiency of something that had been completely understood before it was ever touched. Lim Dae-sung was not killed. Ji-ho was far too strategic for that. Dead men became symbols, and symbols were harder to manage than men. What Lim Dae-sung became instead was a warning, the kind that moved through the city's underworld in whispers for months afterward. The kind that didn't need to be repeated. But Ji-ho also did something else that night, something that had nothing to do with his empire. He spent 2 hours dismantling Lim Dae-sung's American reach, the connections that extended to Charlotte, the network that had encircled Marcus Walters, the suppressed evidence, the corrupted records, the paper trail constructed so precisely to trap a 24-year-old who had wanted to design bridges and had filled 3 notebooks with proof of the life he intended to build. All of it surfaced, documented, passed through channels that would hold to people with both the authority and the obligation to act on it. Marcus Walters was going to get his day. Not tomorrow, but it was coming. And nothing Lim Dae-sung had ever built would be able to stop it now. Ji-ho stood in the aftermath of the facility and felt something he had no word for. Not the cold, clean satisfaction of a resolved threat. Something warmer and less familiar. The feeling of having done something right for someone who deserved it and would never know who had done it. The feeling of being a person rather than a position. He had forgotten. Somewhere in 15 years of empire, what that felt like. She had reminded him, without trying, without even knowing. "Take me home," he said. The estate was past midnight quiet when he returned. He walked through the entrance hall and up the stairs, and down the east wing corridor and knocked on her door. She opened it. Not surprised to see him. Or if she was, she had made peace with it before she answered. She was still dressed. The window seat held the impression of someone who had been sitting there a long time. Her book lay open on the bed beside a pen that hadn't moved in hours. And behind her on the bed, a bag. Half packed. He looked at the bag, looked at her. "Lim Dae-sung's American network," he said. "It's done. The evidence about Marcus has been passed to the right people through channels that will hold. He will have his day. I can promise you that." Something moved through her face. Fast and layered and entirely unguarded. Too many things at once to name. She stared at him for a moment that stretched longer than either of them measured. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." The silence between them held everything that hadn't been said yet. He looked at the half-packed bag, and something crossed his expression so briefly, it was almost not there at all. "You walked through 4 armed guards for a stranger. You stayed when it was dangerous. You told me the truth when everything around me was constructed to make me not believe it." A pause. "And you're packing." "I didn't know what else to do," she said. The particular honesty of someone who has run out of comfortable options and is done pretending otherwise. Someone who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has simply run out of hands. "Stay," he said. One word. From a man who had not asked anyone for anything in 15 years. It landed in the room with the full weight of everything it had taken him to say it. Not the word itself, but the 15 years of silence before it. Ji-ho, not for the job, not because it's safe, not because it's strategic or practical, or because either of us can construct a sensible argument for it. He stopped. This man who had built an empire with words, precise and strategic and final, standing in a doorway at midnight, completely unable to finish a sentence, making no move to hide it, offering her the unfinished sentence itself as the most honest thing he had ever handed to another person. "I haven't turned away from a window first in 15 years, he said finally. "Not once. Not for anyone. Until you." Khloe looked at him for a long time, at this man standing in her doorway without armor or strategy, or any of the considerable distance he had constructed between himself and the world. Just him. Just this. Just midnight, and the city blazing outside, and 2 people standing in the space between everything they hadn't said. She stepped forward. She reached up. She adjusted his tie. One precise, unhurried movement, a fraction to the left, full circle, all the way back to a hotel lobby in Mafia on the worst Tuesday of her year. Her fingers certain and calm, and everything she hadn't said out loud contained in one gesture that he recognized immediately because he had been thinking about it since the moment it happened. His breath changed. She felt it beneath her hands. "That's what you were doing," he said quietly. "In the lobby. I was telling you to pay attention. To the driver. And to me." He reached up, slowly, deliberately, eyes never leaving hers, and tucked one of her locks back from her face. The mirror of her gesture, completely intentional. Everything he had been not saying since a hotel lobby in Mafia contained in one unhurried movement that cost him nothing and meant everything. "I'm scared," Khloe said, quietly, honestly, no performance. Of this. Of you. Of how much I know, he said. I'm terrified. She blinked. You don't look terrified. I know how to not look things. Low. Stripped down. Entirely true. I've been not looking terrified since the lobby. Since you sat back down and picked up your cold coffee like adjusting a stranger's tie was something you did every Tuesday. She looked at him. This man who sat on hallway floors and said words from library doorways, and remembered exactly how she took her tea and had spent 15 years building walls that she had simply walked through without breaking a single one, because she had never tried to break them, had just stood on the other side of them and been so entirely, consistently herself that the walls had eventually become irrelevant. The last distance between them dissolved, not with drama, but with the quiet inevitability of something that had been true for a long time and was only now being acknowledged. She closed the distance. The kiss was quiet and unhurried, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it has been earned by every single moment that came before it. A lobby, and a card, and a coffee outside a door with no note. A word said correctly from a doorway, and left hanging in the air. An almost touch over a document neither of them read. A man sitting on a hallway floor because he did not know how else to say that he could not leave. Outside, Seoul blazed, 10 million lights against the autumn dark, the Han River catching them and holding them the way it had been doing for centuries. Patient and enormous and entirely indifferent to the particular miracle happening in one room of one estate, on one hill above the city. Morning came gently, the way it does after nights that change things permanently and without apology. Khloe's bag was still on the bed, unpacked. The breakfast table in the main dining room had never, in the memory of anyone on the staff, and several of them had been there a very long time, been used by Jiho for anything other than working through briefings alone. Every morning, the kitchen set it for one out of a habit that had calcified into ritual over years of repetition. That morning, they set it for two. Nobody commented. Nobody needed to. The estate felt different, not dramatically, not in any way that could be pointed to and named precisely, but the held breath quality that had characterized every corridor and every room for as long as anyone could remember had been replaced by something that actually breathed, something with room in it, something that had been waiting, without knowing it was waiting for exactly this. He was already at the table when she came down. R's briefing documents open, coffee in hand. He looked up when she walked in and something crossed his face, private and warm and entirely unguarded, that he didn't bother to manage. She had her Korean literature book and her reading glasses pushed up into her locks. She sat down across from him like she had been sitting there for years, like the house had rearranged itself around her without anyone noticing it happen, like Seoul itself had shifted slightly to make room. He looked at his briefing, read the first line, looked back at her. "You're staring," she said without looking up from her book. "I'm reading." "You've read that line 4 times. He said nothing. The corner of his mouth moved in a way it very rarely moved. Taewon entered, morning security briefing, precise, thorough, nothing unnecessary. He delivered it completely. I returned to leave, stopped. "Ms. Walters," she looked up. Taewon looked at her with the considered expression of a man who had chosen every word carefully for 15 years, and was choosing these particular ones with extraordinary care. The lobby, the kitchen staff, the garden, a pause. "You have good instincts." He held her gaze for one moment, and in that moment, in the eyes of the most economical man in Seoul, the man who had crouched down to his boss's level in a hallway and said the thing that needed to be said because someone had to, there was something that went far beyond professional assessment. Something that said, without saying it, "I believed in you before he did. I want you to know that." Then he left. Because he was Taewon, and he was a professional, and he had a job to do, and he had already spent more sentiment on one morning than he typically allocated to an entire year. Khloe looked at Jiho. He was looking at his coffee with the careful, studied expression of a man who was absolutely, completely, privately delighted and was doing a mediocre job of not showing it. Did he just... Don't make it strange. Jiho said. She laughed, warm and full and completely unguarded, the kind of laugh that found every corner of a room that had spent 15 years running on silence and filled all of them simultaneously, all at once, without asking permission. He looked up, and he smiled, small, private, belonging to no audience, performed for no one, existing only in this room at this table in this specific morning light, just for her. She picked up her coffee and looked out at the garden where 2 weeks ago men had come over the south wall and discovered, at considerable personal cost, that Khloe Walters was not a woman who went quietly. It looked entirely different in the morning, peaceful, almost gentle. Everything looked different in the morning. "Hey," she said. He looked up from his briefing. "Thank you," she said, "for Marcus." He held her gaze for a moment, something moving through his expression, quiet and genuine and entirely without armor. "Thank you," he said, "for the lobby." She smiled at him. He looked back at his briefing. The morning held them both in its easy warmth. The particular peace that only arrives after something genuinely hard has been survived together and survived well and come out the other side as something neither person had quite expected to find. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning, the Han River catching the early light, 10 million stories unfolding simultaneously in apartments and offices and streets and lobbies and rooms at the tops of estates on hills above the river. Enormous and relentless and magnificent, carrying everything inside it without pausing or explaining itself. But this story between a woman who had come here with a bag and a reason and a habit of paying attention, and a man who had spent 15 years being the most untouchable person in every room and had been undone, finally and completely, by a single unhurried gesture in a hotel lobby. This one Seoul had witnessed from the very beginning, from the moment she had closed her laptop and stood up and moved before rational thought could stop her. She had adjusted a stranger's tie on the worst morning of her year. She had whispered 2 sentences to a man whose name she didn't know and walked back to her cold coffee like it was nothing. Like it cost her nothing. It had cost her everything, and given her more. Funny. The way that only the most significant things are funny when you can finally see the whole shape of them. Funny, the doors that open when you decide to pay attention. She had paid attention, and Seoul, in its enormous, indifferent, magnificent way, had given her everything she hadn't known to ask for. If you made it here, thank you. Genuinely. You are exactly who this channel exists for. So, if this story made you feel something, if there was a moment that made you hold your breath, or smile at your screen, or feel something you weren't expecting, hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it means everything for this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we have more stories coming that are going to hit even harder than this one. And drop a comment below. Tell me your favorite moment. The tie? The hallway floor, the breakfast table, Taewon's line, the moment she said not because of Marcus, because of you. I read every single comment. Everyone, we will see you in the next story. Don't be a stranger.